Welcome to the Fate and Football Draftkings cash game picks for Week 7. Hopefully you watched our video last week for Week 6. We had some great picks in there. I personally had a great week. Mark Ingram and Derrick definitely for all the money. So starting out this week, I didn't like a lot of the quarterbacks I looked at. Definitely on the expensive side. Wasn't a big fan. I just thought they were overpriced given the positions they were in. Also, too, I think saving a quarterback this week makes some sense since you will probably want to be paying up for some running backs and wide receivers this week since there aren't a lot of great value options. So Tyrod Taylor jumped out to me as the obvious play. Tampa Bay has allowed 277 passing yards a game to opposing QBs. Well, I wouldn't expect that from Tyrod. Something like 225 yards, 30 yards rushing, and maybe a touchdown or two. And you're looking at a nice day for Tyrod given his salary. That said, he is short his outside his weapons with Charles Clay out. So LaShawn McCoy has actually been leading the Bills in targets. So that is definitely the downside to Tyrod Taylor. Brett Hundley from the Packers has been getting a lot of buzz. I've noticed around the DFS industry this week. Obviously, with Aaron Rodgers going down, he was thrust into the game against the Vikings. Pretty tough spot to come in cold after not really playing against the Vikings, and not surprisingly, he struggled. But this week, It could be different, I think, with a week to game plan. It's often we've seen, the backup come in, struggle, and then after a week of game planning and taking reps, with the first team at practice, they turn it around. And New Orleans is a better opponent. And not a better opponent, a better matchup for Brett than the Vikings. So I think they might be beatable even for a rookie especially with the weapons he's got around him. My inclination is that Brett is probably pretty talented from all of the evidence we've seen. He's made the roster both years in Green Bay, and they've made no real move to try and secure a more established backup or draft additional QBs. So I think, it's safe to say they probably like him, and they think he has a lot of potential and upside. He absolutely crushed it in the preseason. So there's that, and other than that, he hasn't seen a lot of action. So really hard to know. As a prospect, he definitely checked a lot of boxes. He's an unbelievable athlete with a SPARQ score of the 98th percentile. So that should really give him some rushing upside. His college QBR was good, and he's a big, strong player. There's talk that they're going to use him more with the read option, and I think doing that with time bond could cause all kinds of fits for defenses. Cleveland's beaten pretty handily through the air this year, and by specifically by tight ends, with reasonably stout run defense. Marcus Mariota looks to be back to full health with all of his weapons around him. The hamstring doesn't seem to be hampering him as he got a full set of practices in this week. So I think it's all systems go for Mariota against Cleveland. If you are really looking to spend up a quarterback, the only really spot I liked was Mariota. So for running backs, the cheap option I think might be viable is Joe Mixon. I'm not convinced yet this is the perfect play, but it's definitely something to look at carefully. Joe Mixon has been slowly taking over the backfield since Bill Lazor took over as offensive coordinator. His snap share has increased steadily each week. On top of that, the Steelers have been selling out in the past and have gotten run all over. They've basically said, you're just not going to beat us through the air, but we'll give up the run. Could be interesting. I really think Joe Mixon, this could be the breakout week. Despite the goofy haircut that you're seeing there, Derrick Henry is a bad man. He's got a 440-pound max bench, 500-pound squad, 4.54 40 time. He's 6'3", 250 pounds. I looked him up on playerprofiler.com when I was making this video, and I noticed that his best comparable player in their database is Zangief from Street Fighter. There's no player that quite matches his physical prowess. I've been wanting to play him so bad, but DeMarco Murray gets in the way. I did sneak him into a few GPPs. But this week, DeMarco Murray has not practiced all week. He's been hobbled by this injury he's been leg injury he's been struggling with all season. He says he's going to try and give it a go, but without practicing, even if he does play, I still think Murray could get a lot of snaps, and I might even consider firing him up if DeMarco does play. If DeMarco's out, I'm locking him in to every one of my lineups, whether it's cash games or tournaments. I think he's that good, and this is a great matchup, especially with Tennessee's offensive line that is basically matchup proof. I hope you all played Mark Ingram last week when he was 4K, because this week the price went up, but even still with the 2K increase, he's got to be a good play. New Orleans is a 6-point favorite, so he stands to see a lot of work similar to last week. And he's just a good player and has been a consistent fantasy producer. LaShawn McCoy at 7,400 is definitely the most mispriced player on this slate. He's had a lot of tough matchups this year in the Jets, Panthers, Broncos, and Bengals, but his usage is elite. He touches the ball and he gets more attempts than anybody else. Well, not anybody else, but in the same sort of tier as your Ezekiel Elliott, your Le'Veon Bell, your Melvin Gordon's, and he's priced below them this week. I think the big reason for that is he just hasn't found the end zone this year, so that's kind of kept his overall scoring down a bit, but I think against this Tampa Bay defense, they should be the antidote for that problem, and I think there's a good chance he's able to find the end zone once or maybe even a couple of times. Also stacking him with Tyrod is a totally viable play given how many targets McCoy's been getting, especially since Charles Clay went out. Zeke has close to the nut matchup against San Francisco, so he's bound to see a lot of work. Assuming he can avoid the suspension coming back on him, he should be good to go. I would say he's a good but expensive play this week. Finally, we've got Le'Veon Bell. It's always reasonable to have a Le'Veon Bell in your lineup, especially a cash game lineup. He is essentially matchup proof. We don't have to worry too much about who the opposing team is, so definitely look to get him. That said, I think I want Antonio Brown in my lineups this week, so I may have to take him out and look for some cheaper options at running back. Finally, watch out for Leonard Fournette. He hasn't practiced all week. He had that awkward-looking injury last week. He says he's going to play, but I seem kind of doubtful just based on all the other, or it could be that he doesn't based on all the other evidence that we've seen. So if that's the case, definitely look at Chris Ivory at 4,800 to get a huge opportunity share. So that could be a good situation to get a little bit of a value running back in. So for wide receivers, Antonio Brown, he's just the best. When I'm having a bad day, I just fire up some Antonio Brown YouTube highlights and everything's right in the world. He's got the highest ceiling and the highest floor, and I really think that's worth paying for. There's nobody else that quite offers that. So I'm really looking to try and get him into my lineups this week. Also, too, Cincinnati has given him problems in the past, but Adam Jones, the cornerback that's been doing that, is going to be out this week, so I don't think there's anything to worry about here. Michael Thomas is at 7,500. Green Bay's secondary is bad and banged up. Last week just seemed like an anomaly to me. It was a strange game flow. There's that weird interception catch play. So I think Michael Thomas will return to his regular scheduled programming of crushing. And I think he should be in for a good game and potentially a monster game. With Devontae Parker trending out again this week, Jarvis Landry should see a huge number of targets. He had 14 last week. He might not get a lot of yards out of them, but he's slated to get a lot of catches. So I don't see how he couldn't be a good play. I might fade him in tournaments, but in cash games, I think he makes a lot of sense. Demaryius Thomas is underpriced, kind of given the situation. Emmanuel Sanders is out with an ankle injury. Really, Simeon only passed to those two with any reasonable amount of volume. So it really means I think that targets will get concentrated on Demaryius Thomas. He does have a tough matchup against Casey Hayward, but they didn't let that stop him last week as they targeted him heavily in a bad matchup against the Giants there. So looks like he should have plenty of opportunity to produce, and he is quite a bit bigger than Casey Hayward. So I think at his price, it's definitely worth taking a chance. Pierre Garcon is quietly having a good fantasy season, averaging 12 points a game. He's getting peppered with targets, double-digit targets in 3 of his last 4 games. He's done well this year in good matchups with Carolina, LA, and Indy, so I wouldn't expect anything less from this matchup with Dallas. Eric Decker's just been underpriced given his expected target share. Him and Mariota have really started to find their chemistry, I think. We saw it last week. This week he has a great matchup against Cleveland, and I think there's a good chance he gets his first touchdown of the season, plus a bunch of catches and yards, so great spot. Finally, we got Robert Woods. So Patrick Peterson, the shutdown corner for Arizona, usually covers the other team's best receivers each week. As you can see, friends don't like friends play wide receivers against Patrick Peterson, and Patrick Peterson notes it as he retweeted it. In this case, we've got Sammy Watkins, who will be most likely shadowed by Patrick Peterson. So that should leave Robert Woods to run around and catch a bunch of passes. Robert Woods is a pretty good player. He had matchups against Seattle and Jacksonville the last couple of weeks and still managed to score some points. So I like him here as a cheaper option, probably for your third wide receiver slot. Tight ends. This week we don't quite have the dumpster fire we were dealing with last week. My favorite of the bunch is Kyle Rudolph at 3,800 in Baltimore. With Diggs out and Baltimore tending to funnel targets to the tight end, Kyle Rudolph is in a great spot, I think, to see a lot of action. He's had 9 targets in the last couple of weeks with Diggs out, and he's really been efficient historically catching touchdowns, even though he hasn't as much this year, and so those very much could come back. Finally, at 4,200, we have Hunter Henry. He's emerging out from the shadow of Old Man Gates. Last week, he saw a 75% snap share and 7 and 8 targets in the last 2 weeks, so it finally seems like the Chargers are setting Hunter Henry free. The Giants also bat against the tight end, and turns out Seattle employs a pretty good tight end in Jimmy Graham at 4,900. Jimmy Graham's had a slow start, but the last 2 weeks he's had double-digit fantasy points, so I think things are starting to turn around for him. Also, too, I think this good matchup could help. That said, he's pretty pricey. I don't see myself getting there, especially in cash games, but in tournaments, I definitely think I'll be making some lineups with Jimmy Graham in them. Finally, Delaney Walker's 5,800, but he's been hurt all week, and he's listed as probable. If he doesn't play, I think the best play has got to be Jonnu Smith. He's caught 2 touchdowns already this year. I think they'll look to him, and against Cleveland's just horrific tight end defense, I think he could be a really good play. For defenses, my favorite defense for the week is the Chargers. They're a small favorite at home against a beat-up Denver offense. We talked about Demaryius Thomas. Obviously, don't play the Chargers if you play Demaryius Thomas, but you could easily pivot to Pierre Garcon at the same price and put in the Chargers D if you're looking to save a little bit of money to finish up that lineup. So Chargers against Denver, I think, is probably the best play given the price. Couldn't go wrong playing the Vikings in Baltimore. Flacco's just looked bad. I think the back injuries, he's clearly not over it. So I think the Vikings defense will just eat up the kind of anemic Baltimore offense. Finally, at 3,700, if you really got some extra money left over, you could do Jacksonville at Indiana. I think the Jacksonville defense should eat up this Indiana team that doesn't have much of a run game and will struggle passing the ball against them. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I do one of these every week. So best of luck in week 7. Thanks.